The lawyer's mahogany desk gleamed under fluorescent lights as my brother Marcus stood triumphantly arms crossed like a conquering king. 8 rental houses in Clearwater, all mine, he announced to our extended family, packed into this sterile conference room. Aunt Clara applauded. Uncle Jerry whistled approval. Even our elderly grandmother nodded approvingly from her wheelchair. Dad sat rigid, avoiding my eyes completely. Mom dabbed her eyes with tissues, whispering apologies. I simply smiled, watching Marcus bask in his premature celebration. "Dad," I said quietly, "you really don't know, do you?" His face went ashen. "Know what?" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with sudden panic. The confidence drained from his features like water through a broken dam. I remained seated, my hands folded calmly in my lap, watching 23 family members lean forward in anticipation. "I think everyone deserves to understand the whole picture." I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. This story began 3 years ago when Dad suffered that massive stroke that changed everything for our family. The room fell silent except for the humming of the air conditioning unit. Dad's left hand trembled slightly against his wheelchair armrest, a permanent reminder of that terrifying February morning when Mom found him collapsed in their bedroom. The stroke had stolen his mobility on the right side and left gaps in his memory like missing puzzle pieces. Dad was always so proud of those 8 rental properties. I continued gesturing toward the stack of deeds on the lawyer's table. 22 years he spent building that portfolio, single-family homes on Maple Street, the duplex on Ocean Avenue, those cute beach cottages on Sand Dollar Lane. They were his retirement security and his legacy. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, loosening his expensive silk tie. He'd driven down from California in his leased BMW wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Success looked good on him, or so everyone believed. When Dad got sick, everything fell apart overnight, I said, my voice growing stronger. Mom was working 50-hour weeks as an elementary school administrator while trying to care for a husband who couldn't walk or remember whether he'd taken his medication. The properties needed constant attention, but who was going to handle that? Aunt Clara's expression softened with understanding. She remembered those chaotic months when we weren't sure Dad would survive, let alone recover enough to come home. Marcus was in San Diego chasing his startup dreams, I said, carefully avoiding accusation in my tone. He visited twice that first year, twice. Meanwhile, someone had to collect rent coordinate repairs, handle tenant complaints, and manage 8 different properties, generating over $12,000 monthly. I'd been working as a property management consultant in Tampa, handling portfolios for investment firms. When I saw my parents drowning, the choice seemed obvious. I took a leave of absence, moved back into my childhood bedroom, and became the unpaid manager of Dad's real estate empire. I spent 3 years keeping those properties profitable, I said, watching Marcus's jaw clench. 3 years driving between Clearwater and St. Pete, dealing with backed-up toilets and broken air conditioning units. 3 years of tenant screening lease renewals and emergency repair calls at midnight. The numbers told the story better than words. $47,000 in management fees I never collected. Countless hours of labor maintaining properties while Marcus posted Instagram photos from California wine country. My own career stalled while his supposedly flourished. But here's where things get interesting, I said, reaching into my briefcase. 6 months ago, I discovered something that changed everything. Dad, do you remember when I started depositing the rental income into a separate account? Dad's eyes focused with surprising clarity. You said it was to protect the money while I recovered. That's exactly what I said, I confirmed, placing a thick manila folder on the table. But what I didn't tell you was why that protection became necessary. Marcus's lawyer whispered something urgent in his ear. I could see sweat beading on my brother's forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning. I found discrepancies in the rental account, I announced. Money disappearing every few months, thousands of dollars vanishing without explanation. At first, I thought maybe Dad had forgotten about some expenses given his condition. The silence stretched unbearably. Mom's tissue disintegrated in her trembling hands. But then I started investigating. I said, opening the folder to reveal bank statements covered in highlighted entries, and what I discovered broke my heart. Marcus stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "This is ridiculous. You're obviously trying to manipulate everyone with some elaborate lie." "Sit down, Marcus," Dad said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone. Despite his physical limitations, our father still commanded respect when he chose to use it. I smiled at my brother with genuine sadness. I wish it were a lie. I really do. Because what I found means someone in this room has been stealing from our sick father for over 2 years. Marcus's face went white as printer paper. Uncle Jerry's mouth fell open. Grandmother's weathered hands gripped her wheelchair armrest until her knuckles turned pale. The separate account wasn't just protection, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It was evidence gathering, because I knew that eventually we'd be sitting in exactly this room having exactly this conversation. The manila folder seemed to pulse with menace as I spread its contents across the polished conference table. Bank statements, canceled checks, and wire transfer records created a paper trail that told a story nobody wanted to hear. $85,000, I announced, watching faces around the room register shock and disbelief. That's how much money disappeared from Dad's rental property account between January 2021 and March 2023. Marcus slumped back into his chair, but his eyes remained defiant. Even if that's true, which I doubt, how do you know it wasn't Dad himself making withdrawals? He was sick, confused. Because I have video evidence, I replied calmly, opening my laptop computer. The screen flickered to life, showing security camera footage from First National Bank of Clearwater. The timestamp read, February 14, 2022. A figure in a navy baseball cap and sunglasses approached the teller window, sliding papers across the marble counter. The quality was grainy, but the build and mannerisms were unmistakable. The teller confirmed that David Richardson's son had been coming in monthly. I said, pausing the video. He always brought power of attorney documents and knew all the account details. Very convincing, very professional. Aunt Clara leaned closer, squinting at the frozen image. That could be anyone. I advanced the footage to show the figure turning slightly, revealing a partial profile. Then I produced a photograph from the folder, Marcus at last Christmas, wearing the identical navy cap, the same distinctive jawline visible from the side. The forged power of attorney documents were very sophisticated. I continued spreading copies across the table. Professional letterhead notary stamps, legal language. Someone spent serious money creating convincing paperwork. Dad's breathing grew labored as he processed the implications. His own son had been systematically robbing him while he lay helpless in a hospital bed, fighting to relearn how to speak. I spent 4 months tracing every transaction, I said, producing a spiral notebook filled with handwritten calculations. Wire transfers to California, accounts totaling $32,000. Cashier's checks made out to various businesses in San Diego. Credit card payments that coincidentally matched Marcus's debt obligations. The evidence was overwhelming, but the emotional weight was crushing. I'd hoped desperately to find some alternative explanation, some innocent reason for the missing money. Instead, I'd uncovered a calculated betrayal that spanned 2 years. The timing was deliberate, I said, my voice growing harder. Marcus knew Dad reviewed the property finances every quarter, so he scheduled the thefts for the middle months when Dad wouldn't notice missing funds until the next review. Mom's sobbing filled the silence. She'd suspected something was wrong, but had been too afraid to investigate, too overwhelmed by Dad's care needs to pursue financial irregularities. I have bank employee testimony. I continued producing sworn statements. Timestamps, transaction records, even security footage from 3 different branch locations. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was systematic financial abuse of an elderly, vulnerable adult. Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely audible. I needed the money for the startup. I was going to pay it back when we got our first round of funding. Needed it for what exactly? I asked, pulling out printed pages from his social media accounts. Cabo vacation in March, the Tesla lease rent on that luxury apartment in La Jolla. The photographs told their own story. Marcus living lavishly in California while his parents struggled with medical bills and property maintenance costs. Instagram posts from expensive restaurants while Dad relearned how to use a fork. I traced the money, I said relentlessly. $15,000 went to pay off credit card debt. $23,000 covered your apartment rent and car payments. $18,000 disappeared at various casinos between San Diego and Las Vegas. Grandmother's sharp intake of breath cut through the tension. She'd always worried about Marcus's gambling, but none of us realized how serious the problem had become. The remaining $29,000 funded your technology startup, I concluded. The same startup that failed 6 months later, leaving investors with nothing but worthless stock certificates. Uncle Jerry stood slowly, his face flushed with anger. You stole from your own father to fund a business that didn't even exist. It existed, Marcus protested weakly. We had a solid business plan. The technology was revolutionary. Revolutionary enough to justify stealing from a stroke victim, I asked. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Dad raised his trembling left hand, commanding attention. Marcus, he said slowly, each word requiring visible effort. Is this true? The question contained 28 years of fatherly love, disappointment, and desperate hope for denial. Marcus met his father's eyes for exactly 3 seconds before looking away. I was desperate, he whispered. Everything was falling apart. I thought I could replace the money before anyone noticed. The admission hit the room like a physical blow. Aunt Clara began crying. Uncle Jerry cursed under his breath. Grandmother closed her eyes and shook her head slowly. But here's what really breaks my heart, I said, my own voice finally cracking with emotion. I didn't report this to the police. I didn't file elder abuse charges. I've been carrying this knowledge for 6 months, hoping you'd find a way to make things right. I looked directly at Marcus, seeing the brother I'd grown up with beneath the layers of lies and selfishness. I kept hoping you'd confess, apologize, and find a way to repay what you'd stolen. I wanted to give you the chance to be the man Dad raised you to be. Marcus suddenly exploded to his feet, pointing an accusatory finger at me. This is all lies. Danai's trying to steal the inheritance by making up stories about me. She's been manipulating Dad for 3 years, isolating him from family. Marcus, Dad said quietly but with unmistakable authority. That's enough. The room fell silent except for the sound of Mom's continued weeping. I think, Dad continued slowly, everyone except immediate family should leave the room. We need to discuss this privately. The extended family filed out reluctantly, whispering among themselves as the heavy door closed behind them. Only Dad, Mom, Marcus, his lawyer, and I remained in the suddenly cavernous conference room. Dad's hand shook as he reached for the folder of evidence. Despite his stroke-related limitations, his eyes moved carefully across each document, absorbing details with the methodical precision that had made him successful in business. Show me everything, he said quietly. I opened my laptop and displayed the security footage frame by frame. Dad watched his son's image moving through the bank lobby, conducting transactions that would rob his own father. The betrayal registered across Dad's features like physical pain. These power of attorney documents, Dad said, holding up the forged papers with his functioning left hand. I never signed anything like this. Marcus's lawyer studied the documents closely, his expression growing increasingly grim. Professional legal fraud carried serious federal implications, especially when targeting elderly victims. Dad, there's something else, I said gently. Something I discovered last week that changes everything about this inheritance meeting. I produced another folder, this one containing property records and legal documents. I had a title search conducted on all 8 rental properties. Marcus has been attempting to forge property transfer documents. The color drained from everyone's faces, including Marcus's lawyer. 2 properties show attempted ownership transfers that were rejected by the county clerk's office. I continued, someone tried to forge your signature on quitclaim deeds, Dad. If those had been successful, Marcus would have owned the Ocean Avenue duplex and the Sand Dollar Lane cottage outright. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. I never forged any property documents? This is insane. The handwriting analysis suggests otherwise, I replied, placing 2 documents side by side. Your signature on the credit application for your Tesla lease compared to Dad's forged signature on the property transfer attempts. The similarities were unmistakable even to untrained eyes. The same distinctive loop in the capital letters, identical pen pressure patterns, matching slant characteristics. Dad studied the documents with growing horror. You tried to steal my properties. I was protecting our family's assets, Marcus shouted. Donna's been manipulating you for 3 years. She moved back home to get close to you and Mom, isolating you from everyone else. Is that why I haven't heard from you in 8 months? Dad asked quietly. Because I was being manipulated. The question hit its target perfectly. Marcus had been so busy stealing and scheming that he'd forgotten to maintain even basic family contact. Dad turned to me with visible effort. Donna, what does your lawyer say about all this? Elder fraud in Florida carries felony charges, I replied. Financial exploitation of vulnerable adults can result in 15 years prison time, plus restitution at triple damages. Federal wire fraud adds another 20 years. Marcus's lawyer finally spoke, his voice carefully neutral. The evidence appears substantial. The banking violations alone represent multiple federal crimes. But there's something more important than legal consequences, I said, looking directly at Dad. I need to tell you about your will. Dad's confusion was evident. My will gives everything to Marcus. We discussed this 2 years ago. Dad, when did you last review your actual will documents? I don't remember exactly. Before the stroke, certainly. I produced a copy of his current will from my briefcase. This was written 5 years ago. It splits everything equally between Marcus and me. You never changed it to favor Marcus exclusively. The revelation hit the room like lightning. Marcus had been operating under a false assumption, believing his inheritance was guaranteed when legal reality told a different story. You mean Marcus doesn't automatically get everything? Mom asked through her tears. The current will provides for equal distribution, I confirmed. But there's another issue we need to discuss. I opened a different folder revealing medical records and legal correspondence. Marcus has been telling people that Dad is mentally incompetent due to stroke-related dementia. He's been claiming that Dad can't make legal decisions anymore. Marcus's face went white. His lawyer leaned over to whisper urgently in his ear. Is that true? Dad asked, his voice stronger than it had been all day. You have good days and bad days, I said honestly, but Dr. Patterson has certified that you're legally competent to make financial decisions. I asked him to document this specifically because I suspected Marcus might challenge your mental capacity. Dad nodded slowly, processing this information. So Marcus was planning to have me declared incompetent. Guardianship proceedings were already being prepared, I said sadly. Legal documents filed in California claiming you needed a guardian to protect you from financial exploitation. The irony was devastating. Marcus had been planning to claim guardianship over the father he was actively robbing. Marcus finally exploded. I was trying to protect him. Donna has been controlling everything for 3 years. She's the one exploiting him. By managing his properties for free, Dad asked. By sacrificing her own career to care for our family. She's been paid, Marcus insisted. She's been keeping all the rental income. In a separate account to protect it from theft, I corrected. Every dollar has been documented and preserved. I haven't taken a penny in management fees. I produced bank statements showing the protected account balance $137,000 in accumulated rental income earning interest in a high-yield savings account. This money belongs to Dad, I said. I've been protecting it until he was healthy enough to decide how to use it. Dad stared at the balance statement, then looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "You've been working for free for 3 years." "I've been taking care of family," I said simply. "That's what we do." Marcus's lawyer cleared his throat diplomatically. "Given the evidence presented, I'd recommend my client consider settlement discussions rather than litigation." "Settlement," Marcus demanded. "For what?" "Criminal charges, civil restitution, federal banking violations." The lawyer listed grimly. "The potential penalties are substantial." Dad raised his trembling hand for attention. "I need time to think about this. This family meeting is postponed until I can process everything we've discussed." As people gathered their papers, Marcus made one final desperate attempt. "Dad, you can't let her turn you against me. I'm your son. I made mistakes, but I'm still family." Dad looked at his son with profound sadness. Marcus' family doesn't steal from family. Family doesn't forge documents or plan guardianship proceedings. Family doesn't disappear for months at a time. Marcus stormed toward the door, his lawyer following reluctantly. "I'll contest everything in court. Dad and I won't get away with destroying this family." The door slammed behind them, leaving Dad, Mom, and me in heavy silence. "I'm so sorry, Dad," Mom whispered. "I should have investigated the missing money sooner." "We all should have," Dad replied. "But Don and I did investigate, and now we know the truth." 2 days later, we reconvened in the same conference room, but this time the atmosphere crackled with tension instead of celebration. Marcus arrived with his lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit, who carried multiple briefcases like weapons. "Before we continue," Marcus announced, standing near the head of the table, "I want everyone to understand that my father is not mentally competent to make these kinds of decisions anymore." He produced a thick folder of medical records and psychological evaluations. These documents prove that David Richardson suffers from severe cognitive decline following his stroke. Any legal decisions he makes regarding his estate should be considered invalid. Marcus's lawyer spread the papers across the table with dramatic flair. "We're prepared to file guardianship proceedings in Florida court, requesting that my client be appointed as his father's legal guardian and financial conservator." The extended family who had returned despite yesterday's dismissal murmured among themselves. Aunt Clara looked confused and worried. Uncle Jerry's face reflected growing anger. "These medical records show memory loss, confusion, and impaired judgment." Marcus continued, his confidence returning. "My father needs protection from those who would take advantage of his condition." Mom started crying again, overwhelmed by the suggestion that Dad was incompetent. The implication that I had been manipulating a vulnerable elderly man was devastating to hear, even as an accusation. "Furthermore," Marcus's lawyer added, "we have evidence that Miss Richardson has been isolating Mr. Richardson from his extended family, controlling his access to information, and manipulating him financially." I sat quietly, allowing Marcus to build his case. Sometimes the best defense is letting your opponent overreach. "My client has witnesses who will testify that his father's mental state has deteriorated significantly," the lawyer continued. "Family members who have observed confusion, memory loss, and susceptibility to manipulation." At that moment, the conference room door opened unexpectedly. Dr. Richard Patterson, Dad's neurologist, entered carrying his own briefcase and medical files. "I apologize for interrupting," Dr. Patterson said, "but Miss Richardson contacted my office yesterday with some concerning questions about patient competency evaluations." Marcus's face went pale. His lawyer looked confused and slightly irritated by this unexpected development. "Doctor, what can you tell us about my father's mental capacity?" I asked. Dr. Patterson opened his briefcase and produced a recent cognitive assessment. "Mr. Richardson does have good days and difficult days, which is typical for stroke recovery patients. However, he consistently demonstrates legal competency for financial decision-making." He placed the assessment on the table where everyone could see the results. More importantly, Mr. Richardson has been recording our conversations for the past 6 months, expressing specific concerns about potential financial exploitation. The room fell silent except for the humming air conditioning. "Recorded conversations?" and Marcus asked weakly. Dr. Patterson produced a small digital recorder. "Mr. Richardson asked me to document his concerns about missing money and unusual family dynamics. He was particularly worried about someone taking advantage of his medical condition." The doctor pressed play. Dad's voice, slightly slurred but clearly lucid, filled the room. "Doctor, I think someone is stealing from the rental properties. Money keeps disappearing, but I can't prove anything yet. I'm worried that my son might be involved, but I don't want to believe it." The timestamp showed the recording was made 4 months ago, long before I had revealed my discoveries. Another segment played, "I need you to document that I'm mentally competent. I think someone might try to claim I have dementia to take control of my assets. My daughter has been protecting me, but I'm afraid my son might try to have me declared incompetent." Marcus sank into his chair as if the air had been let out of him. His lawyer's confident expression crumbled. "There are 12 hours of recorded conversations," Dr. Patterson continued. "Mr. Richardson has been consistently lucid and concerned about financial exploitation for months. He specifically requested legal competency documentation because he suspected guardianship proceedings might be filed against him." Dad spoke for the first time since the meeting began. "I knew something was wrong with the property finances, but I needed proof before I could act. I also knew that someone might try to claim I was incompetent to avoid responsibility for theft." The extended family members who had returned began whispering among themselves. The tide of opinion was shifting dramatically. Aunt Clara raised her hand tentatively. "David, are you saying you've been aware of the missing money this whole time?" "I've been suspicious for months," Dad confirmed, "but I needed concrete evidence before making accusations against my own son." Uncle Jerry's face flushed with embarrassment. "Marcus called us yesterday claiming Donai was stealing from you and lying about him. He said you were too confused to understand what was happening." "Did he?" Dad asked with surprising sharpness. "What else did Marcus tell you?" The uncomfortable silence stretched until Grandmother spoke from her wheelchair. "He asked us to support his guardianship petition, said Donai had been manipulating you and stealing rental income. He also asked me for a loan," Uncle Jerry admitted reluctantly. "Said he needed $15,000 for legal fees to protect you from financial abuse." Dad's expression hardened further. Even his stroke-affected features couldn't hide his growing anger. "There's more," I said quietly, producing my own folder. "I hired a private investigator 6 months ago when I realized Marcus's financial problems were bigger than just stealing from family." Marcus tried to stand, but his lawyer grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. "The investigator discovered that Marcus has been running rental property scams in California," I continued. "He's been using Dad's reputation and credit history to defraud innocent victims." The new revelations hit the room like successive bombshells. Rental property scams involving Dad's identity meant federal crimes and multiple victims. "Tell them about the fake property management companies," I said to my investigator's report. Marcus created 3 different rental companies in California using variations of Dad's name and business history. He collected security deposits from potential renters, but never delivered actual rental properties. Uncle Jerry's mouth fell open. "He's been running scams." "Over $200,000 in victim losses," I continued. "Young families who lost their life savings, elderly investors who trusted him because of Dad's reputation in Florida real estate." Marcus finally found his voice. "Those were legitimate business ventures that didn't work out. Sometimes investments fail. Investments don't involve fake addresses and non-existent rental properties," I replied. "The California Attorney General's office has been investigating for 8 months. I spread photographs across the table showing properties that didn't exist, business addresses that led to empty lots, and victim testimonials describing their losses. This is why I had to act," I said, looking around the room. "It wasn't just about protecting our family anymore. Innocent people were being hurt by Marcus's schemes." Dad's voice cut through the tension. How many victims, Danae? 37 families, I replied. Some lost their children's college funds. Others lost their retirement savings, all because they trusted someone with our family name. The weight of these revelations settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Marcus had evolved from family thief to multi-state criminal, leaving a trail of victims across 2 states. The federal authorities want to interview you, Dad, I said gently. They need to confirm that you had no knowledge of Marcus using your identity and reputation for fraudulent purposes. Marcus finally broke his voice, cracking with desperation. I was trying to build something legitimate. The rental scams were supposed to be temporary funding until the real business took off. You mean the technology startup that never existed? I asked. His lawyer closed his briefcase and stood to leave. I'm withdrawing from this case. My client needs criminal defense representation, not civil litigation support. As the door closed behind the lawyer, Marcus looked around the room at his family members' shocked faces. I have a gambling problem, he whispered finally. I've had it for years. Everything got out of control. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had finally burned itself out. The confession about Marcus's gambling addiction should have brought relief, but instead it opened another door into a darker truth. I reached into my briefcase and produced the private investigator's complete report, its pages thick with documented evidence of crimes spanning 3 states. The gambling is just the beginning, I said, spreading crime scene photographs and financial records across the conference table. Marcus has been operating a sophisticated fraud network that goes far beyond stealing from family. Uncle Jerry leaned forward, studying photographs of victims whose lives had been destroyed by my brother's schemes. A young couple holding eviction notices, an elderly man standing beside a "for sale" sign on his family home. These people trusted Marcus because he used our family's reputation. I continued, my voice growing harder. 22 years Dad spent building credibility in Florida real estate. Marcus destroyed that legacy in 18 months. The investigator's report revealed a pattern of escalating criminal behavior that started small but grew into something monstrous. Wire fraud across state lines, identity theft of multiple elderly victims, money laundering through a network of fake business accounts. Show them the loan documents, I said to myself, pulling out another section of evidence. Marcus had created false financial statements using Dad's property holdings as collateral for loans he had no intention of repaying. Banks in California had approved credit lines totaling $300,000 based on Florida properties they never properly verified. He used our home as collateral for a casino gambling credit line, I announced, watching Mom's face turn white with shock. If those California creditors decide to collect, we could lose the house Dad built 43 years ago. The scope of Marcus's criminal enterprise was breathtaking in its audacity. He had essentially hijacked our father's entire financial identity to fund an increasingly desperate series of get-rich-quick schemes. The private investigator found evidence of mail fraud, wire fraud, and interstate transportation of stolen property. I continued relentlessly. But the most serious charges involve elderly victims in California who trusted Marcus because he presented himself as David Richardson's successful businessman's son. I produced victim testimonials that made everyone in the room shift uncomfortably. Stories of retirees who lost life savings, families destroyed by rental scams that left them homeless and bankrupt. This woman, I said, pointing to a photograph of an elderly lady holding legal documents, lost her husband's pension fund, $63,000 that was supposed to fund their final years together. Marcus buried his face in his hands, finally understanding that his actions had consequences beyond our immediate family. Dad's voice cut through the silence with surprising strength. How many people did he hurt, Danae? 37 direct victims, I replied, but the secondary damage affects children, spouses, extended families. We're talking about hundreds of people whose lives were impacted by Marcus's crimes. The room fell silent as everyone processed the magnitude of the situation. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was about justice for innocent people who had been systematically defrauded. "There's something else," I said quietly. "The federal investigation has been ongoing for 8 months. They've been building a case against Marcus, but they needed our cooperation to complete it." Marcus looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "What do you mean?" "The FBI contacted me 6 weeks ago," I revealed. "They needed inside access to document how Marcus obtained Dad's financial information and built his fraudulent identity profile." The admission hit the room like a physical blow. I had been working with federal law enforcement to build a case against my own brother. "I've been wearing a wire for the past month." I continued opening my blouse slightly to reveal a small recording device. Every conversation, every family interaction, every lie Marcus told has been documented for the federal prosecution. Uncle Jerry's face went pale. "You've been recording family conversations." "I've been gathering evidence to protect innocent victims and prevent future crimes," I corrected. "Marcus's gambling debts are over $400,000. He was planning increasingly desperate schemes to pay them off." I produced photographs from the investigator showing Marcus meeting with known criminals in Las Vegas, money laundering through casino transactions, connections to organized gambling operations that specialized in identity theft and financial fraud. "The people Marcus owes money to don't accept bankruptcy or family excuses," I said bluntly. "They were pressuring him to expand his fraud operation to target more elderly victims across the Southeast." Dad struggled to speak, his voice heavy with disbelief. "You were going to hurt more families." Marcus finally looked up, tears streaming down his face. "I was in too deep. They said they'd hurt you and Mom if I didn't pay what I owed." "So you decided to hurt strangers instead," I said without sympathy. "You destroyed dozens of families to protect yourself from consequences you created." The truth was finally complete. Marcus hadn't just stolen from family or run small-time scams. He had become part of a criminal network that specialized in targeting vulnerable elderly Americans. "The federal agents are waiting outside," I announced. "They've been patient, allowing this family meeting to proceed, but Marcus needs to be arrested before he flees jurisdiction or destroys additional evidence." As if summoned by my words, the conference room door opened. 2 FBI agents entered, displaying badges and moving with professional efficiency. "Marcus Richardson," the lead agent said, "you're under arrest for wire fraud, interstate commerce violations, identity theft, and elder financial abuse." The handcuffs clicking around Marcus's wrists sounded unnaturally loud in the silent room, as they read him his rights. Marcus looked at Dad with genuine remorse for the first time. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never meant for it to get this bad." Dad watched his son being led away in handcuffs, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I love you, Marcus, but you need to face the consequences of what you've done." As the door closed behind the federal agents, the conference room felt empty and hollow. Justice was being served, but at the cost of our family's innocence and trust. "What happens now?" Mom asked quietly. "Now Marcus faces federal prosecution," I replied, "and we begin the process of making restitution to his victims." 3 weeks after Marcus's arrest, we gathered again in the same conference room for what would truly be the final inheritance meeting. The space felt different now, heavy with the weight of truth and the absence of lies that had poisoned our family for years. Marcus sat at the table in an Orange County jail jumpsuit, flanked by his new public defender. His 3 weeks in federal custody had changed him visibly. The arrogance and false confidence had been stripped away, leaving behind someone who looked genuinely remorseful for the first time in years. Before we discuss the estate distribution, Dad began, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "I need everyone to understand what's been happening in this family for the past 3 years." He produced a manila folder that none of us had seen before, thick with documents and photographs that he'd apparently been collecting secretly. I haven't been as confused or helpless as everyone believed, Dad announced, opening the folder to reveal meticulous notes written in his careful handwriting. I've been documenting everything. The revelation hit the room like lightning. Dad had been far more aware and active than anyone realized, including me. Hidden camera recordings, financial tracking, legal consultations I arranged without telling anyone. Dad continued spreading evidence across the table. I've been building a case against Marcus for 8 months. He produced photographs taken with a hidden camera showing Marcus searching through Dad's desk drawers and filing cabinets during family visits. Video footage of Marcus photographing financial documents with his phone when he thought no one was watching. I installed a security system after my stroke, Dad revealed, not to protect against burglars, but to document anyone who might try to take advantage of my condition. The scope of Dad's secret investigation was breathtaking. Financial records showing exactly when money disappeared, phone recordings of suspicious conversations, even GPS tracking data showing when Marcus accessed Dad's mailbox and bank safety deposit box. I knew someone was stealing from me, Dad continued, but I needed absolute proof before I could act against my own son. Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely audible. How long have you known? I suspected something after your 3rd visit when you spent 2 hours alone in my office, Dad replied. I confirmed it when I found evidence that someone had been accessing my financial accounts without authorization. The hidden camera footage played on Dad's tablet showing Marcus systematically photographing every financial document in Dad's home office. Bank statements, property deeds, insurance policies, investment account information. What I didn't expect, Dad continued, was discovering that Donna had already uncovered your theft and was conducting her own investigation. He produced copies of my private investigator's reports showing that he had been monitoring my efforts to expose Marcus's crimes. I've been watching Dana sacrifice her career and personal life to protect our family, Dad said, his voice filled with emotion. 3 years of unpaid labor managing my properties, thousands of hours caring for me and your mother, all while carrying the burden of knowing her brother was a thief. The weight of Dad's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. He'd been aware of my sacrifices all along, documenting them as carefully as he documented Marcus's crimes. The inheritance meeting was a setup, Dad revealed. I allowed it to proceed knowing Marcus would reveal his true character publicly. I wanted our extended family to see exactly what kind of man he had become. Uncle Jerry shifted uncomfortably, remembering how he'd initially supported Marcus's claims. I gave Marcus every opportunity to confess and seek help, Dad continued, every chance to demonstrate remorse and take responsibility. Instead, he tried to have me declared incompetent and steal my properties outright. Dad turned to Marcus with profound sadness. You didn't just steal money, son. You stole my trust, your mother's peace of mind, and your sister's faith in family. Marcus broke down, completely sobbing uncontrollably. I know I destroyed everything. I know I can never make it right. You can start by helping the federal prosecutors build cases against the criminal network you were working with, I said firmly. You can help recover money for your victims and prevent other families from being destroyed. The public defender leaned over to whisper in Marcus's ear. After a long moment, Marcus nodded. I'll cooperate fully, Marcus said. I'll testify against anyone who needs to be prosecuted. I'll help recover whatever money can be found. Dad nodded slowly. That's a beginning, but rebuilding trust will take years if it's even possible. He opened another section of his folder, revealing the legal documents that would finalize our family's future. The 8 rental properties are being transferred to Danai, Dad announced. She's earned them through 3 years of unpaid management and unwavering loyalty. He produced property transfer documents that had already been filed with the county clerk's office. Additionally, I'm establishing a victim restitution fund using the accumulated rental income, Dad continued. Every dollar Danai protected will go toward compensating Marcus's victims. The fund totaled nearly $160,000, enough to provide meaningful restitution to many of the families Marcus had defrauded. Mom and I will retain lifetime rights to our home, Dad said, but the remaining estate will be used to repair the damage Marcus caused. Marcus looked up through his tears. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. Making amends means accepting responsibility, I replied. It means helping victims recover. It means rebuilding trust through actions, not words. Dad reached across the table to squeeze my hand with his functioning left hand. I'm proud of you, Danai. You did what was right even when it was painful. The meeting concluded with legal signatures and final documentation. As Marcus was led back to jail, he stopped to speak to Dad one more time. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry I forgot what that means. I love you too, son, Dad replied. Now prove it by doing the right thing. As the door closed, I realized our family had been fundamentally changed, but perhaps saved. Justice was being served, victims would be helped, and truth had finally replaced the lies that had poisoned us for years. 6 months after that devastating inheritance meeting, I stood on the front porch of the first rental property Dad ever bought, watching a young family move into their new home. The morning sun cast warm shadows across the well-maintained lawn, and the sound of children laughing drifted from the backyard. The transformation in my life had been remarkable. Richardson Property Management now operated 12 rental properties, including the original 8 that Dad had built over decades. My business employed 3 full-time staff members, and we had gross annual income exceeding $200,000. But the numbers meant less than the relationships we'd rebuilt and the trust we'd restored. Dad's health had stabilized dramatically once the stress of Marcus's betrayal was resolved. Physical therapy had improved his mobility, and his memory seemed sharper than it had been since before the stroke. Most importantly, the haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by peace. Regular family dinners helped. Mom had explained to Dr. Patterson during Dad's last checkup. When we stopped walking on eggshells around family secrets, everyone started healing. Mom herself had found strength through therapy and support groups for families affected by addiction and criminal behavior. She'd stopped blaming herself for enabling Marcus and started focusing on rebuilding relationships with the family members who remained committed to honesty. Marcus had been sentenced to 4 years in federal prison plus full restitution to his victims. The criminal network he'd been part of was dismantled, preventing dozens of additional elderly Americans from being victimized. His cooperation with federal prosecutors had been complete and genuine. I get letters from him every week. I'd told Dad just yesterday. He's taking college courses, working in the prison construction program, and writing personal apologies to every victim he can contact. The Victim Restitution Fund had grown beyond the original rental income. Community donations and fundraising events had increased the total to over $200,000, allowing us to provide meaningful compensation to most of Marcus's victims. Mrs. Elizabeth Chen, the elderly California woman who'd lost her husband's pension, had been able to keep her home. The young couple with 3 children had recovered enough money to secure stable housing. Not every victim could be made completely whole, but every victim felt heard and supported. The extended family relationships had healed through honest communication and shared commitment to preventing similar tragedies in the future. Aunt Clara now served on the board of a local elder abuse prevention organization. Uncle Jerry donated monthly to the Victim Fund and volunteered with financial literacy programs. Even grandmother, now 86 and still sharp as ever, had become an advocate for family accountability. I should have spoken up about Marcus's gambling years ago, she'd admitted during one of our monthly family dinners. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to cause family conflict. Family conflict isn't always bad, Dad had replied. Sometimes conflict is necessary to prevent bigger problems. My own life had found new purpose beyond property management. Speaking engagements about elder fraud prevention brought me to community centers and legal conferences across Florida. The experience of exposing Marcus's crimes had taught me that protecting vulnerable people required courage and persistence. Your story helps other families recognize warning signs, the prosecutor had told me. Financial abuse often happens gradually, and family members don't realize how serious it's become until it's too late. The romantic relationship with forensic accountant James Morrison had developed naturally through our work on complex financial fraud cases. He understood the emotional toll of exposing family crimes because he'd helped prosecute similar cases involving betrayal and broken trust. What attracted me to you, James had said on our first real date, was watching you choose justice over family loyalty when it really mattered. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in my relationship with Dad. The respect and trust we'd built through that terrible crisis had created a bond stronger than ever before. You saved our family, Dad had told me just last week. You saved strangers who would have been victimized. You saved Marcus from becoming someone completely unredeemable. I just did what felt right, I'd replied. That's exactly why you were the right person to handle this situation. Looking back, I understood that true inheritance wasn't about money or property. It was about values, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the cost is enormous. Marcus would be released from federal prison in 3 years. Whether he could rebuild relationships with our family would depend entirely on his actions, not his words. Forgiveness was possible, but trust would require years of consistent behavior to rebuild. I want him to succeed, I'd told his parole officer. I want him to become the man Dad raised him to be, but that transformation has to come from within. The 8 rental properties continued providing affordable housing for working families throughout the Tampa Bay area. The property management business had become a model for ethical practices and community involvement. Most importantly, the victim advocacy work had expanded into a nonprofit organization that helped families navigate financial fraud, recovery, and elder abuse prevention. Standing on that porch watching another family begin building their dreams in a property Dad had carefully maintained for decades, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from preserving something meaningful. Marcus's criminal behavior could have destroyed everything Dad had built. Instead, through patience, courage, and commitment to justice, we'd not only preserved Dad's legacy, but expanded it to help others. The phone in my pocket buzzed with a text message from James. Dinner tonight to celebrate the Morrison family closing on their new rental. I smiled thinking about the young couple who'd just signed a lease on one of our renovated properties. They had 3 children under age 10 and were rebuilding their lives after financial hardship. Absolutely, I texted back. Celebrating new beginnings never gets old. As I walked back to my car, I reflected on the life lesson that had emerged from our family's crisis. Sometimes protecting the people you love means making difficult choices that feel like betrayal. Sometimes justice requires sacrifice that seems too painful to bear. But when you choose truth over comfort, integrity, over convenience, and justice over family loyalty, you discover strength you never knew you possessed. You also discover that real family relationships grow stronger through honesty, not weaker. The rental properties would continue generating income for decades. The victim advocacy work would help prevent other families from experiencing similar trauma. The relationships we'd rebuilt on foundations of truth would endure long after the pain of Marcus's crimes had faded. True inheritance isn't what's left in a will. It's what's built through a lifetime of choices that honor integrity, protect the vulnerable, and stand up for justice regardless of the personal cost. That inheritance, I realized, was the most valuable gift Dad could have given me. Have you ever faced a situation where doing the right thing meant confronting someone you love? How do you balance family loyalty with standing up for justice? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family justice and finding strength in difficult times. And don't forget to share this story with someone who might need to hear about the power of choosing truth over comfort. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most meaningful outcomes.